Here's the deal. We will eat billions of hot dogs as American every single year, but do we really know what's in them? Let's find out. It's the Exam Room Live. Oh boy, happy almost baseball season. Let's go Mets. That's what I have to say about that. But we're really going to be talking about hot dogs today because, as I said, people eat billions of hot dogs every single year. As a matter of fact, research by the Hot Dog Council finds that the average American will eat 70 hot dogs every single year. And the majority of those people really have no idea what's in them and what the ramifications could possibly be for their health. Well, today we are going to coach up and raise your health IQs as we look at America's pastime and the food of all pastimes, the good old-fashioned hot dog. Noah P. is our registered dietitian making his exam room debut today. I'm so excited that he is here. We've got so much to talk about, including his team going in and really looking at a hard survey that we have done at the Physicians Committee of people talking about, well, do you actually know what a hot dog can do to you? A lot of us really don't. All we know is how they taste. So let's dive into it. Noah P. is the man with the master plan. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Chuck. I am thrilled to be here with you today and, of course, all of the listeners as well.
I'm thrilled that you're here. And by the way, as a first-time guest, I always like to start off with welcome to the show. It's been overdue for you to be here, man. So I'm really excited to introduce you to the roomies.
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, it's I know I've been a roomie myself for several years now, and it means a lot to be part of the show now.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about the good old-fashioned American hot dog, my friend. Let's start with this. What in the world is actually in this sausage, man? What makes up a hot dog, Noah?
Boy, well, that is the sort of age-old question. You know, some people really want to know and will Google it. Others, you know, maybe they know better to not look into it too closely. To start, there's a few I like to start with the additives, the easy things, if you will. So there's a handful of just random ingredients, things like yeast extract, hydrolyzed vegetable protein, MSG is another one, monosodium glutamate. These are mostly for taste and a little bit for texture, but the real bulk of the hot dog, that's where things get a little bit dicier. So when you go to the grocery store and walk through the meat aisle, you will see a lot of familiar sounding cuts of meat. There's a lot more to the animal that doesn't end up in that aisle. And that's because it's parts that people don't really want to eat. They're usually thought of as kind of the rejected, undesirable pieces, things like organ meats, little bits of muscle, fat, things that just kind of cling to the bone that take a lot of processing and extracting to really get. And they take all of these pieces, these organ meats, grind them all up into this kind of liquidy pulp, and then put it through this processing treatment that eventually results in the hot dog that you would buy in a store. So it's really all of the rejects, but you know, clearly the hot dog industry, I think they've done a good job of keeping that all kind of quiet about those pieces that go into it.
The leavings, as I like to call it, the left behinds in in the meat factory. That sounds absolutely horrifically non-delicious to me these days. But as a kid, as a lot of people in the chat will say, I mean, they grew up eating hot dogs. I mean, I remember after school going to grandma's house, she would make a hot dog for me, wrap it in American cheese, white bread, not even a bun, just a slice of white bread, and then put a little bit of ketchup on top. So if you get that double dose of a hot dog with the American cheese and the white bread, what are the possible ramifications a person could be facing with their health if they eat such a thing, Noah?
Yeah, well, it really is a sandwich with a recipe for disaster. The hot dog itself is really where we'd focus a lot of our attention, although we could definitely go down the path of, you know, all of some of the fixings, specifically the cheese, that might not be doing you any favors either. But hot dogs, and this is really important for people to understand, is a type of processed meat. There are a lot of different components in the hot dog that are causing it to be detrimental to your health. The ones I want to start with talking about are these things called nitrates and nitrites. A lot of people may have heard of these two compounds. In fact, they are actually also found in vegetables, and your body kind of produces and cycles through them naturally. But they are found in a very high concentration in processed meats like hot dogs, because they're added for stability and longevity of the product. Hot dogs can last a long time in your refrigerator because of these additives. So there is a slight advantage to that, to adding them for that reason. But once you consume these compounds, that's when they start having some really negative impacts on your body. So because of the way hot dogs are cooked, these nitrates and nitrites actually turn into these really dangerous compounds called heterocyclic amines. Now, that's kind of a big and fancy term. It's not necessary to have that very chemical sounding name memorized. But the important thing that you need to know about what they do is that they cause damage to your DNA. They get into your cells, they come into contact with your genetic material and start causing mutations. And that is really the birthplace of cancer. Cancer originates from cells that have undergone mutations that cause them to replicate and divide without control. And that is, of course, a top killer of Americans and people across the globe. So avoiding processed meat means avoiding these really dangerous carcinogens.
What would you say to somebody who would say, yeah, but I maybe just eat 1 or 2 hot dogs when I go to the ball game, and I don't go to the ball game all that often. What I know about the research shows that it really doesn't take a whole lot of this processed meat to have one heck of an impact on your health. In terms of just the quantity here, how much processed meat does a person need to eat to get that risk of cancer increased? It's not a lot.
Yeah, it's a great question. And oftentimes, if you're not a scientist, you might see these studies come through or get covered in the news media, and it will say something like eating 1 hot dog a day increases your risk X amount. And that can be a weird statistic to try to apply to your own life because it feels so different maybe from the way most of us live our lives. So there was one study that I really like, and a lot of other people have found to be helpful. What it did is it rearranged its data and did some calculations to really say, okay, what is the impact, the actual in the moment, or I guess down the road, but the impact of eating 1 single hot dog. And they found that for every hot dog that you eat, it chisels away 36 minutes of healthy life from your lifespan. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to die 36 minutes earlier. That feels like a very specific thing to claim. But they said on average, we see people have the disease state starts catching up with them 36 minutes earlier than it would have otherwise. So every half hour, I know to me is precious. I have a busy life and try to be intentional with every minute that I have. 36 minutes in just a few bites, it feels like a equation that I am not willing to make a trade based off of.
Yeah, and let me slide this in there. I know that you're getting married here pretty soon, so I'm sure life is even more precious right now. I would go out on a limb here and hazard a guess that you're probably not going to be serving hot dogs at your reception, Noah.
We will not. No, if that's what you're looking for, you'll have to go somewhere else.
Hey, let me ask you this. I'm looking specifically at the ingredients list for Oscar Mayer Classic Beef Frank hot dogs, and they list corn syrup in here as well. And we talked about the nitrites and the nitrates. Corn syrup is another hot topic for a lot of people. As a dietitian yourself, where does corn syrup fall in your health spectrum?
Yeah, so corn syrup itself is what we would call an ultra processed food. It's very highly refined. It can have negative impacts for people who are dealing with diabetes, type 2 diabetes, especially. But for me at least, if I see an ingredient list with corn syrup included, to me that usually is an indicator that this is not a very whole, unprocessed, healthy food that I would want to be choosing. So it really can usually then would steer me towards a less processed version. Of course, there are foods that show up in at least even in my sort of vegan and hopefully healthy lifestyle that occasionally have corn syrup. But yeah, the fact that it's showing up in hot dogs is probably just one more indicator that it is a food you want to avoid.
Laura Beth Jackson in the chat. By the way, if you have a question for Noah, go ahead and drop it in the comments or in the chat. We're going to get to as many as we can here on the show today. Laura at 1211. What about those hot dog eating competitions? What do you think the ramifications are for somebody who's pounding down 70 some odd hot dogs in the span of 7 minutes?
That is a scary hypothetical question, or not even hypothetical question, a
It's a real
reality
thing, man.
to consider for some of these competitors. I know Joey Chestnut, this famous hot dog eating, he's a legend in that tradition. Has actually switched to being sponsored now by Impossible Foods. He is avoiding these highly processed animal-based hot dogs. And I think that probably comes from the fact that this research is showing the dangers of eating processed meat. So I don't know of the specific impacts that it would have on some of these competitors. I think maybe that would be an interesting study to do. It is a pretty small group of people, so the challenges of a high quality study are there just because of the sample size. But I can guarantee it's not a great choice.
Yeah, a couple of things. Number one, clarification. Joey Chestnut is in fact sponsored by Impossible Foods or Beyond, one of the two, but he does still compete and eat meat products. So he is not switched over himself over to plant-based, but he does endorse plant-based products. I think because of the flavor, and he likes the fact that there are alternatives there. But I'm wondering about just the insane amount of salt and sodium that are in these hot dogs. And I would imagine that if somebody were to eat 70, that would even outdo the amount of sodium I was getting in my 10,000 calorie a day diet. I mean, I would go through one drive-through meal where I would be getting 10,000 milligrams of sodium in one sitting. If you're eating 70 some odd hot dogs in 10 minutes, that's got to exceed 10,000 milligrams of sodium. That's probably not a good thing, my man.
It's very true. Yeah, I believe the average hot dog has coming up on 600 milligrams of sodium, and so that is a couple of those, and you are approaching, if not over, your daily limit, the doctor's recommended daily limit for sodium. So yeah, that is another one of those components of a hot dog that just makes it a really unhealthful choice for folks.
Yeah, and Cheryl's pointing out at 1214, I mean, that's got to raise a person's blood pressure. What, as a dietitian, you hear numbers like that. What do you think is actually going to happen to somebody's BP?
Yeah, it's going to go up. That's what happens when you have large amounts of sodium. But we actually know that hot dogs have several other components that increase your risk of high blood pressure. And high blood pressure, I usually think of as sort of an intermediate disease state along the way towards heart disease and larger, more acute conditions like a heart attack. So sodium, absolutely, it's going to raise your blood pressure. But also several components of hot dogs also really have cause harm to the arteries that move the blood throughout your body. So when you eat plant foods, on the one hand, especially chewing leafy greens, there's something especially about that chewing process that causes your blood vessels to relax, and that lowers your blood pressure. Hot dogs, processed meat, things high in saturated fat, on the other hand, have the opposite effect and cause your blood vessels to become hard, stiff, not able to respond to the natural fluctuations in blood pressure. So those two things together, a healthy diet that avoids processed meats and saturated fat, combined with a diet that is moderate in sodium, is really going to set up your heart for lasting health.
Yeah, we haven't even talked about the cholesterol factor yet either. I mean, you're talking about arterial blockage and things like that. I mean, you got to figure that the hot dogs are really going to do their best to get in there and have you need a roto-rooter by a cardiologist before too long.
Absolutely. Yep. So you will find cholesterol in hot dogs. Importantly, you will also find saturated fat too. So if you look at a traditional hot dog, it's maybe 12, 13, 14 grams of fat, 40 milligrams of cholesterol. And those two things combined can really do a lot of damage to the health of your circulatory system. So the more you can avoid traditional hot dogs, maybe even choosing some plant-based alternatives. There are some commercial versions available that are free or very low in saturated fat and fat generally. And those would be much better options for people looking for that hot dog-like experience.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about healthier options here in just a little bit as part of this survey that we did on our website. I know that we also did research as far as which Major League Baseball stadiums actually offer plant-based options for fans, which I think is pretty cool. And it's close to, if not half of all of the stadiums now in Major League Baseball offer these plant-based options, which I think is absolutely fantastic. And I think that if nothing else, a lot of people might try them just out of sheer curiosity. I think that that would be a pretty cool thing. So let me ask you this. Hypothetical. I want for you to put on your imagination cap and go with me here, Noah. Um, you've got all of the leavings, all of the different parts of the animal that are making up the hot dog. And what do you think would happen if you sliced it real thin, put it under the microscope, and took a look at what is actually, happening surface level on the hot dog? Are we just going to see all kinds of nasty on there?
Yeah, it's very possible. So hot dogs, in addition to just their inherent unhealthfulness, also there's a risk of contamination. I don't have the stats on me exactly, but I know there's if you aren't cooking them carefully and avoiding what we sometimes call or things cooking methods that can lead to bacterial growth, there can be infectious disease that comes about from it too. I also can think back on any time I've known someone who had a new baby and they were looking to introduce solid foods if they were not already plant-based. Hot dogs were one of those choking hazards too that we would want to be careful with. So as a dietitian, I would want to be asking about just the way a parent is introducing solid foods. And so that's just one other way that hot dogs can show up in a really scary and dangerous way for, in this case, young children.
I would actually love to hear from hot dog fans right now in the chat just to see if we can kind of balance this out. I would love to take a serious question from somebody who's like, yeah, but hot dogs taste good and I'm not plant-based. So what's the big deal here, guys? I would love to hear from somebody. Somebody was, a little bit earlier, like I'm craving a Dodger dog and wash that down with the beer. Hey, you know what? And that's actually a decent question, Noah. If somebody were to add alcohol to the hot dog, which you've already established is not a health food, does the alcohol compound the ill effects of the hot dog here, or is what do you think happens from a dietary standpoint?
The thing that first comes to mind for me is if you're consuming alcohol, your judgment is probably not going to be quite as acute as it normally would be. Maybe that appetite starts leading you towards unhealthful food. So I always recommend being careful with alcohol, just because it leads to unhealthy decisions like eating processed meats. On a sort of physical or nutrition level, I think there's definitely a possibility that your body, as it's responding to both the alcohol coming in, which just puts a lot of demands on your system, that it would have some negative consequences also for the ways you're digesting that hot dog. I would need to do a little bit more research into that particular combination. But again, even just from a behavioral standpoint, I see some real downsides.
Going back to the conversation we were having about the hot dog under the microscope, Annette points out at 12:19 that some people eat a raw hot dog right out of the pack. And yeah, I was as guilty as anybody of that as a kid. But you're saying even though it may say pre-cooked on the package, there's still some risk there, right?
There can be. So it is true that it is cooked ahead of time. And actually, because of the way it's cooked, that is the process that leads some of these especially harmful chemical or harmful compounds to form. But I think too about if you go into a gas station and you see these hot dogs sort of on these rollers, and I can only assume they've been there for hours and hours, if not maybe even days. And so that exposure to the air, where we know bacteria are always just kind of floating around, the possibility of it settling on a hot dog, growing into something more dangerous is absolutely there. So I think most people try to cook hot dogs for the taste. Eating one straight out of the package, it's going to have some liability, but maybe not as much as one that's been sitting out on your countertop for multiple hours.
And you just reminded me, I haven't thought about this in years. Back in high school, when I worked at a golf course, shout out to Jefferson Golf Course in Falls Church, Virginia, one of my jobs was to tend the snack bar. And we had a hot dog roller. And it is a fact, and this was 20 some odd years ago. So please don't go to Jefferson and say, hey, you're still doing this today. But we would actually take hot dogs from the previous day that didn't sell, put them in a baggie, put the baggie in the fridge, and put them back on the roller the next morning to sell them. So if you take a look at a hot dog on a roller, you say, hey, that's not looking too fresh. You're absolutely right, my friend.
Well, and it's a good point too that there's, the kids selling hot dogs at your average baseball stadium probably have not undergone the certification for serving food safely. They're just doing their best to make a few bucks. So I would not, nothing against young people being industrious and getting out there and getting employed, but they are probably not trained in the way that a food service professional should be for working with that kind of food.
I asked for actual hot dog fans, and Maryland came through with a comment at 12:21. I eat Nathan's hot dogs. They are 100% beef with no chemicals. They're grass-fed beef, and I grill them. So if somebody sees a hot dog package that says 100% beef, grass-fed, does that make it a healthier option?
I actually grew up with this same notion as well. It was always kind of a fancier cookout when we got the all beef hot dogs. And the fact is, most of those processing methods are still the same. The meat products that go into your average hot dog might include some beef, but they're going to include some other animal products. An all beef hot dog is really just kind of narrowing the scope of the animals that you're taking that meat from, maybe getting slightly higher quality cuts. So there might be a little bit of that ick factor if that's a big component for you. But a lot of the processing components are still identical, and we know that the health implications don't really vary all that much between the different types.
So on the all beef hot dog here, again, I've got the Oscar Mayer list pulled up in front of me. It just says beef. Would it be fair to say that you could shade that with, as you said, the organ meat from the cow? You could get a part of the leg. You could get a part of the stomach. You could get a choice cut, but it's just all different parts of the animal mixed up, but it's still 100% beef, correct?
That's my understanding. Yeah. In dietetics, we sometimes talk about foods having this health halo. And I think the hot dog industry has been really good about saying, hey, if you're getting an all beef hot dog, this is one of the good kinds. And I think it's a little bit more of a deception than actually based in reality.
All right. Before we talk about the baseball survey that we did, Shark Air is wondering about a hot dog's cousin. A lot of people say the cousin of a hot dog is bologna. We weren't going to talk about bologna today, but I do think that this is a pretty close relative here, which is also made up of all different kinds of things. Have you had an opportunity to look at bologna to see maybe that's a healthier option? Maybe it's a worse option. What's the score with Bologna?
My suspicion is that it might even be a worse option. The fact that you don't really need to some of these processed meats, I believe bologna is one of them, that you don't need to refrigerate means they're using probably even more of these preserving additives that have these negative health consequences. So yeah, any sort of sandwich or lunch meat all falls into the same category as processed meat. And I would put them as just as dangerous as a hot dog would be.
All right, now let's see if we can take that danger to a next level. I will also give you one of my childhood favorites. Take the bologna. You take that red ring, that wrapper off of the outside of it. You take that bologna slice, you put the slice in a pan, and you put a little bit of bacon grease in the pan, and then you fry the bologna. And then you fry a second slice of bologna. And then you take 2 slices of white bread and you butter the outside of that bread. You then take the 2 slices of bologna, add 2 slices of American cheese, sandwich it, and then make a grilled fried bologna cheese sandwich. Is it a miracle that I'm alive today, Noah?
It is a miracle that I think many people here are thankful for. Yes.
I mean, seriously, you hear that, like, as a dietitian, I'm not trying to be biased, but I'm just wondering, like, what kind of like shock cringe value runs through your mind as you're hearing that sandwich described?
Yeah, I think one of the things that comes to mind is that high heat cooking method. So anytime you're heating, especially animal products, in the presence of fat and even sugars, you're getting these reactions that create really damaging and carcinogenic compounds in the food. So we already talked about the nitrates and nitrites. Another one are these advanced glycation end products. Longtime exam roomies will maybe have heard of them before, AGES, AGES. These are things that naturally occur in some foods, and your body actually does make some very slowly, but you have a method of getting them out. A sandwich like the one you described is going to be a gigantic dose of these AGEs, and your body's not going to be able to keep up with that big deposit. What this ends up doing is, again, raising your risk of cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's too, we see a link to, and premature aging. So the more you can avoid these high doses that your body's not going to be able to handle, doses from foods like processed meat, animal products, processed grains, all kind of cooked together in high heat, that's really going to set up your long-term health for success.
Yeah. Yep. But man, why does bad for you taste so good at the same time? You know, people wouldn't eat these things if they didn't taste good. That's kind of the cruel joke here. I'm not sure that that sandwich would taste good to me today with the taste buds being changed, but we're just hardwired to love this kind of stuff at the same time, man.
I do and don't agree. I think there's a lot that we naturally incline ourselves or naturally inclined towards because just on an evolutionary level, we are kind of hardwired to look for foods that are high in fat and high in sodium. Historically, I'm talking way back, like back when we were in prehistoric times, those two things were really hard to come by. High calorie dense foods and sodium and salt we're tough, and we need some of them, but we don't need anywhere near as much as we're getting now. So we do have a natural inclination towards some of those, but I think there's also a lot that we can emulate through much healthier alternatives and get a very similar, if not even tastier food product, like some hot dog alternatives. Even the sandwich that you mentioned, I'm sure with some tweaking, we've got some great culinary specialists. Justin, who's been on this podcast, who I'm sure could work a little magic, come up with a great tasting alternative to something like that.
Important question. Do you consider a hot dog to be a sandwich? This is a hot topic.
Yeah, I've heard compelling arguments on both sides. So no
Like
no
arguments.
shade to anyone. I probably do, but yeah, I'm a sandwich, big tent sandwich definition guy.
Gotcha. All right, I got you. I just think it's so funny. We've got compelling arguments on both sides. That's why I love you, man. We have not talked about the binder in the hot dog yet. 1218 Terrible Lotus is wondering about the binder in a hot dog. Do they use egg, or I've heard some people refer to natural casing? What do we know about the hot dog wrapper?
Yeah, so the casings, those can come from some kind of scary places as well. Naturally, just when meat that they use in hot dogs is ground up and uh, the way they cook it does naturally sort of congeal, for lack of a better term. Those things are used or intestines and parts of the animal. There might be some slightly more modified versions now, but ultimately they can still be detrimental. The collagen kind of tends to be one of the common threads between all of those as a component you see in the tendons and ligaments of animal products. We have collagen that we make ourselves, but putting it into your food is not something that we recommend.
Redhead 689 at 12:29 p.m. My husband loves the very low-fat bologna. He thinks layering a handful of slices between two pieces of bread is a great diet food. Do you agree, Noah?
For one, I think low fat there might be a little bit relative. It's still potentially higher in fat than you would want. I would need to see the exact nutrition label. But again, fat is just one of the detrimental components in processed meat. The fact that you are heating high protein food with these preservative elements to high heats and adding some other stabilizers, all of those result in a product that even independent of the fat can still cause a lot of damage to our health.
All right, let's go ahead and talk about some of those healthier alternatives that are being served up in baseball stadiums around the major leagues here. What are some of the bigger stadiums that offer these for fans, Noah?
Yeah, so there's a few that our survey has found, and that we've been happy to call attention to and highlight. So the Chicago White Sox, their Rate Field in Chicago, where the Colorado Rockies play at Coors Field, Oracle Park of the San Francisco Giants, Globe Life Field, where the Texas Rangers tend to play, and then the Toronto Blue Jays home turf, Rogers Center. Those all are offering plant-based options, which we're really happy to see.
The Rogers Center, that's an older stadium, but it is incredible. I had a chance to watch a game there a couple of years ago, and that stadium actually has a hotel built into the outfield. So, with some of the rooms in the hotel, you actually overlook center field, left field, right field, and like you can watch the game from the comfort of your hotel room. That place is magical, man.
Mhm. That sounds like a very inviting weekend trip.
Oh, it's great. I think that it's fantastic. Let me see what other stadiums we have here. Did you mention Nats Park here in the Washington, D.C. area? I can't remember off the top of my head whether or not they may serve a plant-based hot dog.
You know, they were not on that list, but I did do a little bit of looking into them because that is the park that I've been to most times as well. So even though they're not serving plant-based hot dogs, there are some really tasty looking other options. So I actually found a marinated tofu pupusa that was being served, which is, for those of you who don't know, is a El Salvadorian flatbread. And they also, on their website, actually Nats Park has a great way of searching for food based on dietary restrictions. They had a vegan quesadilla crunch wrap. At least it was listed under this vegan section. I wasn't able to find more information on it, but those alone sounded like two really delicious options for the next time I'm there.
That's amazing. I mean, the fact that you got like a vegan papusa there. I mean, like that's all right. I see you, Nats. I see you, Nats. I'll take that. I was quickly looking up the dining options at Citi Field in New York, where the Mets play. Unfortunately, they have not yet listed their 2025 dining guide. They say to check back soon. Hopefully, they'll get that up before they have their home opener next week. But yeah, that would be great to get some more plant-based options on there. I do believe in Los Angeles, even though that is the quintessential home for a hot dog, with the famed Dodger dog being served there. I do want to say with a certain degree of confidence that they have those plant-based options there. LA, of course, a big market for plant-based eaters. So it only makes sense to me. And again, I would think that, check my plant-based bias. I would think that even the old me would want to try a plant-based hot dog just to see what it tasted like. Just satisfy the curiosity factor. Before you went vegan, is that something you'd be interested in entertaining?
It's been long enough ago. I'm curious how the old pre-vegan Noah would respond to that. This was a question that we asked in our survey of 2,200 adults, and a surprising number of people were open to trying plant-based hot dogs. Actually, 4 in 10 were open to trying one at a baseball stadium. And in fact, 2 in 3 people that we surveyed, so 2/3 of respondents, believe that stadiums should offer plant-based hot dogs. So there is an appetite for options, and I think making them more commonplace, especially giving them the attention that they deserve. If you're serving a vegan hot dog as an afterthought compared to an animal-based one without anywhere near as many fixings, that's going to make them look less appealing. So just continuing to lift them up as a healthier alternative, I think, can really push the health of baseball fans forward.
Let's talk a little bit more about the study here as we kind of wind things down. Of the adults that we spoke with, how many were actually aware of the ramifications that a hot dog could have on their food, on their health? Like, how many people knew that it was not the healthiest thing in the world for them to be eating?
So we kind of had 2 parts to that question. 70% of respondents had heard the fact that there were health risks, But when we did a follow-up question and asked for what those specific risks were, only about 20% of people were able to think of specifics. So there's a huge gap in between people's knowledge of the health implications of eating hot dogs, and where they hopefully could be. So this is definitely an area that we're trying to make an impact on, trying to educate people and let people know that cancer, specifically colorectal cancer, is very closely tied to hot dog consumption.
Did we restate that if they said that they weren't aware of the specific health risks? Were we able to list that off and then have them re-answer the question?
I think we found that that 20% was kind of the big number, the big headline, that only 20% were able to recall specifics. So yeah, we are hoping to close that gap. Sorry, I might have missed the.
Well, I guess my question was, if we were able to tell somebody they weren't aware of the specific health impact that processed meats, including hot dogs, had on them, I'm just curious, if we said, well, yeah, it can cause obesity, it can cause high blood pressure, it can cause cancer. And then did we ask, does that change your opinion of whether or not you would eat a hot dog?
Of course. Yeah. So we did actually. So thanks for clarifying that question. And in fact, once we let people know, then 75% of them then kind of came around to the idea that plant-based alternatives should be available at stadiums.
Gotcha.
So we did see a nice increase. So even in the conducting of the survey, this was sort of a first foray into educating at least a few people, and I know we have a lot more ways to go.
Yeah, I want to say hi to Prester John and Keith, who are watching right now. Keith being in Portland, Oregon. No professional baseball team there that I know of, at least not in the major leagues, but glad to have you here, Keith. A couple of more questions here, and then I'll cut you free because I know you got big things to do this afternoon. Number one, when it comes to these plant-based options, we do have some people who are wondering, well, are they actually healthier? Are they still loaded with sodium? Where do they fall in your health spectrum, Noah?
Yeah. So, I mean, I love this question because it reminds me of a time 2 summers ago when I was camping. I was with a bunch of friends. They had all brought animal-based hot dogs, and I had my little package of plant-based ones. And the comments I got from several people were, well, I'm sure those are just as processed as, this animal-based one that I'm eating. I don't know if I would want to eat that. It's actually really interesting. When you look at the ingredient list, one, it's oftentimes a lot shorter. The items are much more recognizable. And I know that's not a perfect way to evaluate a food, but it's a way to start. If you actually do a side-by-side, though, of the nutrition breakdown, you'll see that compared to a traditional hot dog, which, again, we touched on this earlier, is high in fat, 12, 13, 14 grams per hot dog. Some of the leading brands of plant-based alternatives have a quarter of that, if not even less. Light Life has 2.5 grams. Morningstar has only half a gram of fat. We aren't connected to or necessarily endorsing either of these brands, but just as popular ones, we know that they are a whole lot lower in fat, lower in sodium as well. The Light Life had about half as much sodium, which was similar for the Morningstar. What I thought was also interesting is that both of these 2 leading plant-based hot dogs actually had more protein than the traditional hot dog. And not only more protein, but higher quality because it was plant-based protein. And there's a few different types of bases that various hot dogs will use. But yeah, ultimately the result is just a more appealing nutritional profile than anything that you would buy in the animal section of your hot dogs grocery store selection.
All right. And really quickly, Spam, Sandra at 1240 is wondering whether Spam is kind of akin to hot dog in terms of nutrition. I would assume so. We don't have to do a deep dive on that ingredients, but it's got to be pretty much on par.
I think so. Yeah. My understanding is that Spam tends to be very high in sodium, especially, but it is absolutely a processed meat. I would put that as almost a 1-to-1 with a traditional hot dog.
All All right. And Little Bits of Bliss 1241. Chuck, I just want to thank you for this podcast. It's so easy to fall off the wagon of a healthy diet and lifestyle, but your show gets me right back on the wagon. Thank you for all that you do. Little Bits of Bliss, this is why we do the show. There's no such thing as perfection. We all teeter, we all totter, but I'm glad that you're staying healthy and this show can play a role in keeping you on that right track. So thank you so very much for being here. Noah, final question for you, bro, is a simple one. Have you had the carrot dog recipe that's posted on our website, the Physicians Committee's website? It is surprisingly freaking delicious.
I have honestly been blown away by every carrot dog that I've had. You would think that a root vegetable could never compete with the flavor of such a time-tested, traditional food like a hot dog, but the flavor is amazing. The texture is surprising, and you can cook it in the same way that a meat-based hot dog would be. Put it on a stick, roast it above a fire, put it on the grill. It fits right very neatly in a bun. I've enjoyed making it on multiple occasions.
Absolutely. And look, here's my honest to God barometer for these things is, would the old me have enjoyed this? And I can say beyond a shadow of a doubt, the answer to that question is a resounding yes, 100%. The first time I had it, I was skeptical. I was like, carrot dog, God, this is going to taste horrible. It tastes like a hot dog. I was shocked. And how simple that recipe is. I dropped it in the comments here. So if you're watching on YouTube and on Facebook, I dropped the recipe right there. And if you're listening to the podcast, it's going to be in the episode notes. Shockingly good. And I'm sure night and day in terms of a nutritional comparison here.
Oh, huge difference. Yeah. The total avoidance of anything processed like you would see in a meat-based hot dog is not just a step, but a great bound in the healthier direction. So I heartily recommend carrot dogs. There are also some really other great options as well. If you get online, Google vegan or plant-based hot dog recipes, options that use tofu or even seitan will come up. So many to try and choose from, which I'm hoping this podcast comes right at the perfect time as spring is starting to approach in many parts of the country, and people are thinking about how to get outside, do some grilling, and fill their buns with something a little bit healthier.
There it is. And as Lori says in the chat at 1243, it's economically friendly too. You can buy a pound of carrots for less than $2. Amen to that, my friend. So save your life, save a few dollars at the same time. It's all good stuff. Noah, thank you so much for being here, my man. This has been great. Congrats on the survey. We've got a link to that down below in the show description today as well if you wanted to dive into the data with us. You the man, look forward to speaking with you again.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me, Chuck. Thanks to all the listeners for the great questions too. We were able to cover a lot today.
I feel like we were too. So that's Noah P. I'm Chucky C. And on behalf of everybody here at the Physicians Committee, thank you so very much for watching and raising your health IQ with us. And until next time, keep it plant-based.